What is up, guys? Thanks for watching as always, and welcome to the second installment of Carve Catch. This is part one of the Furniture to Fish episode. So just to keep it real short, we had some excess furniture here. We had to get rid of some chairs. When I got home, my wife had cut the chairs up into all the pieces, so I literally had my work cut out for me. Either way, I had plenty of excess wood. It was really good quality wood, really nice hardwood, and obviously I could definitely build some lures out of that. So we're actually going from the leg of a chair to this particular stick bait right here. It's designed for big largemouth bass and also striper, because I will be heading to Long Island this summer to hopefully catch my first legal size striper. I've caught some small ones here in the Lake Texoma. Yeah, we'll go from there. It's been a bit longer between videos because I've been fishing a little bit. We've been hitting the lakes for white bass as well as hybrids. A lot of fun. I'm gonna take a couple of shots like that. But yeah, let's just keep it short. Let's get going with the lure build. Alrighty, so as I said before, we're starting off with the leg of this chair. I'm going to determine what my working space is in terms of how much wood I've got to work with, and then we're kind of going to base the design off that. So I just used the leg of the chair to determine the height of the lure there, and then I'm just going to fill in the rest. Now this is quite a heavy wood. It's quite robust, quite dense, so it's a little bit harder to cut the shape. And also, to be honest, really dense hardwood, so really heavy wood, is not the greatest for topwater lures unless you plan on using a minimum amount of balancing weight. Obviously, if you use only a little bit too much, it'll already be a sinking lure. So yeah, we're planning on using the smallest amount of balance weight as possible. So we'll have to think well on the design of the bait. Now here I'm just super gluing the design to the leg. It's going to be kind of hard to draw on it, and here we're just using the bandsaw to cut out the shape. The wood was too dark to actually make a accurate and easy to see outline of the lure, so that's why we stuck the design on the wood this time. But that's all pretty straightforward. Now, one thing I will say, because we can use such limited amount of balance weight, we're actually leaving the body quite round. That actually helps us balance out the lure in a much easier way, because if the lure was going to be very thin but with very high sides, you're going to need a lot more balance weight to actually let the lure sit straight, and too much balance weight would in this scenario mean it would be a sinking lure, which is what we don't want. So you'll see that the height and the thickness of the lure will be pretty close to each other. Here we've got the cutout. We're just determining the middle of the lure. I do it by just by eye, so I don't really measure it out, but it's close enough to what we need it to be. As you may know, the first episode of Carve Catch, we actually made the most basic walk the dog lure that you could think of. Didn't paint it, just coated it with some super glue to keep the water out, and it was carved out of a stick that we found outside, just to give you an idea how easy it can be. This one is also a walking the dog lure, but we much more focus on the design of the lure, how good it looks, and also the swimming action. Obviously, the wood that we are using is a little bit of a limiting factor. I'd much rather use a lighter wood, but still, this is going to be an outstanding topwater. So we're rounding off all the shapes, all the edges right here, and we're pretty well done to start sanding the lure here. So looking pretty good. Made a little bit of a mess there, but that's part of the job. Alright, so we start off with a rough grid. This is quite tough wood. So start with 60 grit. 60 grit will help a lot, but I would emphasize with a really tough wood like this one, it is worth it to go a little bit extra with the knife so that you save yourself some time on sanding. It also prevents you from going through multiple sheets of sandpaper, but that's easy enough. So once we sanded it with the 60 grit, we actually go down to the 300, and then as you can see, we're ready to design the face. Now, as I say with all the videos that I make, it's not necessary to go to full length of designing a face and all that, but since we made a terribly bad looking top water the last time, I want to show you that with some extra effort you can also make a great looking top water that's still pretty easy to balance. I think in the first couple of videos we made a lot of GT top waters that are very hard to balance out, but walking the dog lures are super easy to make, and if you want to really learn how to finish off a bait well, they're great because you don't have to worry about balancing too much, and you can focus on the actual look of the lure, and you'll still, at the end of the process, will still have a very well functioning lure, because top waters that are walk the dog style will pretty much always work. You can barely go wrong with them. So here we've made all the cuts for the gills. I always make the deep cuts first on the actual lines where I've drawn the face, and then I at the end of that I carve towards those deep cuts so that we can actually have an outline of the gills, the mouth. Sometimes I do the eye sockets as well, but since it's a small lure, or relatively small lure, it's much easier just to leave that as is. So once those cuts are made, I sand them with the 300 grit, make sure everything's smoothed out. If you plan on doing this the exact same way that I'm doing, so that means that you'll be foiling this lure as well, it's worth to take the extra time with sanding, because if you don't sand it evenly and the cuts are kind of like uneven, the foiling job is going to show that, so you'll see all sorts of wrinkles in your in the foiling around the gills. So here we're going to determine where the balance weight is going to be. Now we're only going to put in a tiny little bit of weight. We really want to just put it in one particular spot, not in multiple different ones, and kind of go from there. Now we'll also have to screw in the screw eyes. They'll hold the tail and the belly hook, as well as the attachment point on the nose. And once we've determined where the middle of the tail and the middle of the belly is, it's good to go from there. So here we're just drawing the indicator of where the weight hole is going to be roughly, and that'll be that. Now we'll say, if you can make a top water that kind of sits with most of its body in the water, that can actually be quite a successful top water bait, because most top waters like the head and spooks, they really sit with most of their body out of the water. They don't create a big wake, they create a bit of a splash, and it's kind of zip over the water. Whereas if you can make a lure that kind of, I wouldn't say dives down, but creates a wake, because most of the body is in the water while it swims, that can be a completely different outcome in terms of success with top water lure. So it might also be a little bit easier for that fish to inhale that bait. So here we're just putting the weight into the weight gaps and filling it back up with sawdust and super glue, as we always do, and then we're just ready to sand it off. Cool. Now we're using some really heavy duty screw eyes. Reason why we use such heavy duty screw eyes is because we're going to be targeting striper with these as well. Even big largemouth bass might be pretty heavy on your gear as well, so it's always worth going in that extra mile to make sure that it's a durable lure. These I've been able to order online from a lure building website. They're not very cheap, unfortunately, but they're worth it as long as it makes it a durable lure. It's good enough. I think these were advertised as screw eyes that were used for making musky baits, so I'll have faith in that. So here we've got the hooks on, and we're ready to test it out in the pool. Now, I didn't want to go to the extent of epoxying it and then figuring out if it was going to be good. So here's a little tip. If you want to have a quick test without putting the paint on or anything, spray it with some hairspray. It'll actually seep into the grain of the wood. You let it dry for about a minute or two, and it's ready to go test out. It's not going to be your best coating, obviously. Definitely don't use it as your finish coat, but for a quick test in the pool, it's good enough. Problem is that if you test your lures without any form of coating that protects the wood grain, water is going to seep into the wood, and you're going to have to wait about a good couple of hours before that wood is drying and ready to be painted. So saves you a little bit of time. So we're just using a Sharpie here to contrast the outlines of the gills and the mouth, as well as the eye socket. They'll come out nice once we finish up the foiling job. You obviously can use paint as well, but a Sharpie is cheap and easy and not so messy, so I always resort to that. And here you just see the foiling job. So technically we're building a same style lure that we built in the last video, walking the dock topwater, but we're going to the complete other side of the spectrum. Still using some salvage materials, this case just an old wooden chair leg, but we'll go to the other side of the spectrum in terms of design in the bait and how we finish it off. So here you'll see me just rub the foil into the gills and in the mouth, and it comes out quite nice. And this is where that extra effort of sanding the gill plates comes in. It'll make for a much better finished product. Now of course we're going to do some scale foiling as well, so we're going to determine the length of the lure here and the shape as well, so that we can cut alongside the body. Now be careful that you do not scratch the foil here. Make sure that you don't press the foil in the wood too hard, because while you're measuring out the lure, because otherwise that foil is damaged and you just cannot use it anymore. Those scratches come up very, very easily. And this is that tedious job of the 1,000 cuts. No, I wouldn't have a clue how many cuts it is, but it's a lot. So I've skipped forward because paint job is really not that important. I just did a standard green color there. Here it's ready with foiling. You'll still see that the belly is not done, but this is only the first epoxy coat. What we'll do is we'll put one epoxy coat on after the foiling. We'll sand it down a little bit, and then we'll spray the belly with some chrome spray paint, and that will actually cover the foil lines that you see on the belly, so it'll make for a good finished effect. Now as always, the eyes are going to make this lure come alive, so here we put the eyes on, and this is just before the second epoxy coat. Shazam, that looks awesome. Perfect. So after that spray paint coat on the belly, ready for the second epoxy coat. Oh, you'll see me here outline the belly still being exposed, so that's what we want to get rid of. I will tape off the sides here because I don't want maybe any splatter from the spray paint. It might potentially get onto the side of the epoxy. I just want to lightly spray it, and it'll look much, much better. You won't see the outline. There you have it. Perfect. It's a neat little tip for how to make a even transition from paint to foil. If you've got an airbrush, you don't even need the tape, because you can make an accurate enough spray, but unfortunately with spray paint it's not that easy. So cool. So the pool is a little bit dirty because of a storm and the rain that we had come through here, but I've contrasted the image enough so that you can see the action of the lure here. So it's your standard walk the dog bait, but it does sit quite deep in the water, so it leaves an awesome wake. I've already tested it out. I've had 2 misses by bass. I will say they were protecting their fry, so not really any proof in the pudding there, but I also hooked a big alligator gar on it. As you know, hooking those fish up can be quite tough, but we're ready to give it a good couple of tests and show you the footage of that pretty soon, or as soon as possible. Now, cool thing is, and I didn't even anticipate on this, this walking the dog bait actually swims when you do a straight retrieve as well, kind of like a stick bait for GTs. That was just coincidental, and just a byproduct of that being quite a heavy lure and it almost being a suspending lure, only slightly floating. Now, I did have a bit of an unfortunate mishap while testing for the first time, and you'll see that right now. Alrighty, so I'm out here with my good friend Gaiden, who is supposed to test this lure that I had fairly early into the fishing session, on what I can only blame on the wind, but that was actually a very poor cast on my behalf. It ended up in a tree, all tangled up. It was all the way up there. Spent about an hour trying to get it back, well, probably even longer. Eventually it fell into the water while the line broke. Long story short, I dug around with a rock attached to my line with a treble, and on pretty much the last effort on trying getting it back, we got it back. It sank to the bottom because there was rocks attached to it, but it really looked like I wasn't the only unlucky person. There's a crankbait, look at this. There's a crankbait in there, there's a worm, there's a little jig, there's a broken, that is a Pit Boss, Havoc Pit Boss by Berkeley. There's all sorts of shit in there. There's a tiny torpedo by Haddon. What else is in there? Man, there's all sorts of in there, but I mean, look at the amount of fishing line, the amount of lures that people have casted in there. Crazy. Anyway, most important part is my lure is in there. So, pretty happy camper right now. Oh, as always guys, thanks for watching part 1. Hopefully we'll be able to upload part 2 soon, and that'll just be a complete testing video. So thanks for watching, and until the next one, cheers.